What if one of the foods most people with blood sugar concerns feel nervous about eating was actually far more complicated than they were told? Not automatically good, not automatically bad, but highly dependent on the type, ingredients, and amount. Because when most people hear the word chocolate, they immediately imagine sugar spikes, guilt, cravings, and completely avoiding it forever. But the reality is more nuanced than that, and understanding the difference may completely change how someone approaches chocolate while managing blood sugar more carefully. Today, we are going to talk about several types of chocolate and cacao products that are commonly discussed in nutrition research related to blood sugar management, inflammation, insulin sensitivity, and long-term metabolic health. More importantly, we are going to separate real cacao from heavily processed candy products that only resemble chocolate on the packaging, because those are not the same thing at all. Now, before we go further, it helps to understand what makes cacao different from ordinary sugary desserts. Cacao naturally contains plant compounds called flavonoids. These compounds have been widely studied for their relationship to circulation, oxidative stress, vascular health, and insulin sensitivity. Researchers are especially interested in compounds called flavonols and epicatechins found naturally in cacao. One reason these compounds attract so much attention is because insulin resistance is not simply about sugar itself. It also involves inflammation, oxidative stress, circulation, and how efficiently cells respond to insulin signals. That matters because in type 2, diabetes and prediabetes, the body often still produces insulin, but cells stop responding to it properly. And many nutrition studies focus on foods that may help support healthier insulin, signaling over time as part of an overall lifestyle approach. Cacao is one of those foods researchers continue studying. But here's the critical distinction. The benefits associated with cacao are linked to cacao itself, not highly processed candy bars filled with large amounts of sugar and very little actual cacao. That difference changes everything. And fortunately, it only takes a few seconds to identify the difference once you know what to look for on a label. So let's begin with the first type, dark chocolate, containing at least 70% cacao. For many people, this is the easiest starting point. Compared to conventional milk chocolate, higher cacao dark chocolate usually contains significantly less sugar and more cacao-derived compounds. It also tends to have a lower glycemic impact than many common sweets. One reason is simple composition. As cacao percentage increases, sugar content generally decreases. Meanwhile, cacao naturally contains fiber and fat, both of which slow digestion and help reduce the speed at which glucose enters the bloodstream. That creates a slower and steadier response compared to highly refined sugary snacks. Many adults are surprised to learn that some forms of dark chocolate have a relatively modest glycemic impact when consumed in moderate amounts. Researchers have also studied dark chocolate in relation to vascular health and insulin sensitivity. Some studies suggest flavonoid-rich cacao products may help support endothelial function. That term refers to how well blood vessels expand and respond throughout the body. Healthy circulation matters enormously for long-term metabolic health because insulin and glucose both rely on the vascular system to reach tissues efficiently. Now, this does not mean chocolate is a treatment, and it does not mean unlimited amounts are helpful. Portion size still matters tremendously. But moderate amounts of high cacao dark chocolate are very different from heavily processed candy products, and that distinction is important. One of the biggest mistakes people make is trusting the front of the packaging instead of the ingredient list. Many products advertise phrases like dark chocolate, while still containing large amounts of sugar and relatively low cacao content. A simple habit helps enormously here. Look at the ingredient list. Ideally, cacao mass, cacao paste, or cocoa should appear before sugar. That usually gives you a much better sense of what you are actually buying. Now let's move to the next category, dark chocolate with 85% cacao or higher. This is where things become even more interesting nutritionally. As cacao percentage rises further, sugar content usually drops again while flavonoid concentration increases. That means the flavor becomes more intense, less sweet, and often much richer. Interestingly, many people notice they naturally eat smaller portions of very dark chocolate because the flavor is more concentrated and satisfying. And portion awareness matters enormously when managing blood sugar. Several nutrition studies involving high cacao chocolate products have explored markers related to inflammation and cardiovascular health. This is especially relevant because people with insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes often face increased cardiovascular risk over time. Researchers continue studying how cacao flavonoids may interact with vascular function, oxidative stress, and inflammation pathways throughout the body. Again, moderation remains critical. The goal is not eating large quantities. The goal is choosing better quality and more appropriate composition. For many adults, even 1 or 2 small squares of high cacao chocolate may feel satisfying enough. And psychologically, this matters more than people realize, because completely forbidding foods often backfires. Many people enter cycles of extreme restriction, followed by overeating. But understanding portions and product quality creates a more balanced relationship with food, and long-term consistency matters far more than perfection. Now let's talk about something even more concentrated: pure cacao products, 100% cacao chocolate and cacao nibs. These products contain no added sugar at all. The flavor is extremely intense and noticeably bitter at first, but nutritionally, they provide cacao compounds with essentially no added sweeteners. Cacao nibs are simply crushed pieces of roasted cacao beans before further chocolate processing. They are crunchy, rich, bitter, and extremely concentrated in cacao flavor. For many people, these products work better as ingredients rather than standalone snacks. Some add small amounts to plain yogurt. Others mix cacao into smoothies or oatmeal. Some use unsweetened cacao powder in warm drinks instead of sweetened cocoa mixes. And that brings us to one of the most important distinctions in the entire conversation. There is a huge difference between pure cacao powder and commercial hot chocolate products. Many powdered chocolate drinks contain large amounts of added sugar and very little actual cacao. But pure unsweetened cacao powder is entirely different nutritionally. The ingredient list should ideally contain one thing only: cacao or cocoa powder, nothing else. Now let's continue with another category many people with blood sugar concerns ask about constantly: sugar-free chocolate. This area is important because not all sugar-free products work the same way. Some use sweeteners that have very little effect on blood glucose. Others may still create a noticeable response despite being marketed as diabetic friendly. And this is where reading labels becomes extremely important. Certain sugar substitutes like erythritol and stevia are commonly used in lower glycemic chocolate products because they create sweetness without behaving like ordinary sugar in the body. That is why many people prefer these options when trying to reduce sugar intake while still enjoying chocolate occasionally. But there is one ingredient many people overlook completely: maltitol. This sweetener appears in a large number of sugar-free candies and chocolates. And despite the marketing, it may still affect blood sugar much more than people expect. That is why 2 products sitting next to each other labeled sugar-free may behave very differently. Again, the ingredient list matters far more than the front packaging. And once people begin checking labels carefully, they often realize how misleading some marketing can be. Now let's talk about perhaps the most concentrated cacao form discussed in nutrition research: pure unsweetened cacao powder. This is the form many researchers focus on because it contains very high concentrations of cacao flavonoids, without the added sugar found in many processed chocolate products. Cacao powder can be added to several lower sugar foods and drinks quite easily. Some people stir it into plain yogurt. Others add it to oatmeal. Some mix it into smoothies or warm, unsweetened almond milk. And because the flavor is naturally rich, even small amounts may provide strong chocolate flavor without relying heavily on sugar. Researchers continue studying cacao powder in relation to insulin sensitivity, oxidative stress, inflammation, and long-term metabolic markers. One reason scientists find cacao interesting is because oxidative stress and chronic inflammation appear closely connected with insulin resistance over time, and flavonoid-rich foods are often studied for how they may help support healthier vascular and metabolic function as part of an overall dietary pattern. Again, this does not mean cacao replaces medical care or healthy lifestyle habits. It is simply one nutritional component researchers continue exploring, and that distinction matters. Because many people hear discussions about healthy chocolate and immediately assume unlimited amounts are beneficial. But dosage still matters, composition still matters, overall nutrition still matters, context always matters. A few squares of high cacao dark chocolate after a balanced meal is completely different from consuming large quantities of highly processed sweets throughout the day. Now there's another topic that deserves attention here: food guilt. Many adults with blood sugar concerns develop extremely stressful emotional relationships with food. Certain foods become mentally labeled as bad, and once guilt enters the equation, eating behavior often becomes more chaotic rather than more controlled. Interestingly, nutrition psychology research repeatedly shows that excessive guilt around eating may contribute to cycles of restriction and overeating. People feel they failed, then overcompensate later. That pattern often becomes more harmful than moderate planned portions ever were. A more sustainable approach usually involves understanding ingredients, understanding portions, understanding frequency, understanding context, because sustainability matters enormously for long-term health habits. Someone who can occasionally enjoy a small portion of high cacao chocolate intentionally and calmly often maintains better consistency than someone trapped in constant cycles of restriction and frustration. And that psychological side of nutrition rarely gets discussed enough. Now let's quickly summarize the key ideas. The closer a product is to real cacao, the lower the sugar content usually becomes, and the more cacao compounds it generally contains. 70% dark chocolate is often the easiest entry point for people transitioning away from very sweet products. 85% dark chocolate provides even less sugar and more concentrated cacao flavor. 100% cacao products and cacao nibs contain no added sugar at all but have a much stronger, bitter taste. Pure, unsweetened cacao powder provides concentrated cacao compounds without added sweeteners and works well mixed into other foods or drinks. And sugar-free chocolate products depend heavily on which sweeteners they actually use. The ingredient list matters tremendously, not the marketing on the front of the package. Most importantly, chocolate itself is not one single category nutritionally. Highly processed candy bars and high cacao dark chocolate behave very differently inside the body. And understanding that difference allows people to make far more informed choices instead of operating entirely from fear or guilt. Now, one final point before we finish. No single food determines metabolic health by itself. Not chocolate, not sugar, not carbohydrates. Long-term blood sugar management is shaped by overall lifestyle patterns, sleep, stress, movement, muscle mass, nutrition quality, body composition, consistency, medical care. All of these pieces interact together over time. But learning how specific foods actually work allows people to make smarter decisions instead of relying entirely on myths or fear-based thinking. So if you enjoy chocolate and have been assuming you could never eat it again while managing blood sugar, hopefully this conversation helped create a more balanced perspective. Better ingredients, better portions, better awareness. Those things matter far more than panic or guilt ever will. If you found this video helpful, subscribe for more practical conversations about nutrition, healthy aging, blood sugar management, metabolism, and long-term wellness. And now I would love to hear from you. Which type of chocolate do you usually choose most often? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you for watching. Take care of yourself. And remember that understanding food is always more powerful than fearing it.